let's just start by, I'm Paul, Director of Maintenance for Thunderbird Aviation, Crystal, and Flying Cloud. And we run a big flight school and FBOs at 2 locations. And what we're going to talk about is kind of a continuation. I bring this in all the time, but you know, we're getting to that cold weather operations. And I noticed that flying this morning, you know, it's getting close to the time for winterization plates and some different things that I ran into that took us a little while to get off the ground because we weren't quite ready. And that was, you know, low tire pressures.
Yeah, it's working now.
Last week they were nice and warm.
Yeah, thank you.
And when we were flying, and the tire pressures were fine. But you know, as the temperatures start cooling off, you start have to plan ahead and get things ready. So, so I guess the first topic would be. Let's go kind of on that pre-flight inspection. What are we going to be doing on our pre-flight? And I would say number one was tires. All our tires were low. Last time we were flying, it was that warm-up we had, and it was about 70, 75 degrees out. You know, the air's cooler, so now the tire pressures go down, and there's not a whole lot of volume, especially in the smaller nose wheels. That's what we noticed the biggest decrease in pressure on ours was the smaller volume front nose tire. And so I don't know how often you guys check them. The flight school here, what we've noticed is we had a rash of flat tires and pinhole tire problems, air tube problems, pulling them off taxiways, runways, going out to off to other airports and getting them. And I thought, you know, wait a second, we check these every 50 hours, but what's happening in between? And, you know, so what I implemented was every student now is checking tire pressures before every flight. And our flat tires have gone down probably 95%. So what's happening is tire doesn't look low, but it is below air pressure. And I think what it does is when you're landing and taking off, you know, they're speeding up, slowing down really quick. And what I see is the tubes getting abraded. It's pulling on those tubes because they don't have as much pressure and they're holding everything. You'll notice the tire and the stem start to creep a little bit. If you notice on most tires, you're going to see a dot on there, a red dot or a yellow dot, depending on the manufacturer. A lot of times they're red dots, and that's usually where you mark. It's the light spot on the tire. So they usually have you put the stem there to balance the tires out a little bit. And that's always a good idea that you see that stem and all of a sudden you start to see it moving off that dot. You know that your tube and your tire are twisting together. It's putting a lot of stress on those tubes. So that's the one thing on tire pressures right now. Remember, cooler air temperatures, check the pressures on them more frequently. And so we, you know, this morning we're like, looking a little low, and I'm like, Pete, go get the gauge. And it's like, ooh, oh. So we ended up filling up our tires. So that's one of the things on the pre-flight. The other thing that I wanted to get into was, I don't know, I was kind of a bad poster person for this because I came to my airplane and I probably had about 10 gallons of side in there. And that's always in this time of year where, at any time really, but I mean, especially in the winter time, sitting in a cold hangar, you don't want any condensation and things to build up in there. So try to top off your tanks. Now we're not worrying about performance. A lot of times I leave mine at the tabs because of performance in the summertime, but in the wintertime, try to remember to top off your tanks. And, you know, got lazy last time we were flying and I left them, left them low, so they had to go over and, fill up. You think about that, moisture and contaminants, as water, it's suspended, lower, it's heavier than the fuel. So it's down there and you're usually draining it out. But there are times, now it has to get really cold, but there are times where that water can freeze inside the tank. even though it's been insulated by the fuel above it and stuff. And what I think about that is if you get too much water, and I remember back, there was a Cafe Standard. Those are the guys that kind of look at different things on airplanes, cars, and everything. They did a study on the old Cessnas. Now the restarts like this one, I'll show you. Let's come over here, Pete. After this report came out, let me get my pointer here, guys. It's kind of interesting. After this report came out on like the 172, the 150s, 152s, they said, gee, they had one sump that we always see in the back. My Piper has one sump back here and then one up on the gascolator. That was the only sump Cessna's ever had. Well, when Cessna came back online again in 1996 with what we call the restart Cessnas, now look at it. They got a sump here. They got a sump there. 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 There's more on the belly, several on the belly. Each wing tank has that many. What they found is it's not a perfect science that all the water and debris goes down to the one sump.
Sorry, what was that?
So
we did?
That's assessment for the case of probably liability and different things. Put a bunch of sumps on there so they make sure that you're getting some of the contamination. Now, depending on all the things in it. So, a study came out is they filled up, put some, like a gallon of different amounts, but let's just say a gallon of water in an old 172 tank. And then they, filled up with fuel, let it all settle out. And then they start sumping out and also checking from the sump to where the pickup is, what kind of water content and contamination they got out of it. And I think from one of the reasons that there was a concern is, it was a very cold operation. I believe it was up in Alaska. Somebody ended up switching tanks. They had fuel in their tank, but that water that was not able to be sumped out was in the pickup area of the screen, and it froze right there. And now it did a blockage.
Just learn.
And they had less fuel than less usable fuel than they anticipated on their flight. So that's something to think about. Cold weather operations and stuff like that. That moisture can condense a little bit into frozen pieces and stuff like that. It's got to get pretty cold for that to happen, so it's not a real big concern where we are. We're not flying up in Alaska, but in Alaska and up in northern Canada, they consider their fuel and the moisture in there as, they really want to watch that. But we do too, because it'll burn through, but probably you're flying along and you burn through some of that. Any contamination of water in there, your engine kind of it burns it sputters a little bit, and then you go, "Ooh, what was that? What was that?"
I think they're already in FOS.
So, what's that?
He said he thinks already in FOS.
Oh, okay. So anyway, so that was the idea on that. Keep the tank filled. Keep it filled. Make sure that they're topped off. I really like to top them off in the wintertime. And so the next thing, also on the pre-flight inspection, things that change a little bit. A lot of times on pre-flight, we check control surfaces. Primary control surfaces. You move the elevator or the stabilator in the back. Check the rudder, check the ailerons, make sure other linkages are good. But there's one thing that we tend not to check, and that is we don't usually hop in and move our trim wheel. Now it is a secondary, and if it was stiff and hard to move, it's just going to give us some back pressure or yoke pressure that we don't like. So you'd be fine. But what we find out is, especially when we do maintenance on the flight school planes and stuff, as temperatures get colder, a lot of these trim barrels and smaller cable-driven trim actuators get a little stiffer. The lubrication on there, even though it's specified for a range of temperature, you don't have as much authority on those with the trim wheels and stuff. And sometimes people get in there and they go, "Oh, it's really cold out there. I really had trouble with the trim." And so it's just kind of go through, make sure it's lubricated, make sure that everything feels good on the trim. You know, if you got the elevated, especially the elevated trim, because that one you want to, you know, it's really nasty fighting that back pressure. You know, if you got a back pressure or nose down pressure, that you can fly the plane, but it's very, very uncomfortable because you're trying to hold it and it wants to go one direction. So I always think winter, especially winter operations, it's not bad to go in there before you take off. Just check your trim, see how the trim wheel's feeling. You know, does it feel nice and smooth, easy to move, easy of operation? You can always, you know, move it, go back there, see how it's operating in the back. So that's one thing on a winter pre-flight that I like to see and to do. So, and then the next thing is we have less daylight. So I don't know, customarily here at Thunderbird, they check the lights, everything on the pre-flight. I don't know what your pre-flight, if you have a night pre-flight and a day pre-flight checklist. That's how I do it. I don't go through all the lights if I'm flying VFR day. It's just, you know, a lot of people have different feelings on how to do it. However, sometimes when we're flying and we kind of forget about it, it gets dark pretty quick now. And say you're taking off in the afternoon, late afternoon, probably a good idea that even though you're planning on coming back VFR day, do a check on your lights. Make sure you do a check just in case you get out there and it's getting a little bit darker. I mean, I know we all usually check our landing lights and any recognition lights out there, but check your navs. Make sure they're good. I mean, obviously we need our strobes during the day also, but I usually use my landing light at takeoff and landing and recognitions at takeoff and landing, even on VFR weather during the day. So just kind of, there again, kind of remember all your different time frames that you're working with.
Hey, Paul.
Yep. Hello.
I just muted him. I don't know who it is. I don't know who it is.
Thanks.
There you go.
All right. Are we good now?
I think so. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know what was happening there. I can't hear it. Pete's going to have to see. I don't hear what's going on. That's interesting. But anyway, so yeah, that's kind of going through the pre-flight. Maybe a change from winter. One thing also, I don't know if people are using leave their wheel pants on. I do leave my wheel pants on. I take my nose pant off. But on the wheel pants, one thing that's not a bad idea if you've been out and it's been a little bit warmer and you have slushy air, I'll come around the other side with me. Depending on the style of wheel pants you have, these are the kind I have on my airplane. They call them I think they call them the fat boys, which is probably fitting for me. I'm a little chubby. They have quite a bit of room in there aerodynamically, and when you put a wheel in there, this is actually fits a 6x6 wheel in here. And I'll show you. I'll grab a tire just to show you how much room is in there. But there are a lot of wheel pants that are a lot tighter. So here's about where that center of that wheel is. But you look on the bottom edges and the front edges, and sometimes you'll actually see a scraper bar on there. And you know that's supposed to keep debris, any ice and snow from building up inside the pant. So this one does not have that scraper bar in there, but some of them do. But it's always good to look in there. If you can, take a flashlight in the mirror every so often, especially if you've been in a slushy situation and then it got cold. and make sure, you don't have any chunks of ice in there that are going to give any problems that could be rattling around at takeoff, that could, damage your tire or anything like that. And then from that aspect of it, I'll explain retractable gear. Those of you that are flying retractable gear airplanes. Last week, I think it was last weekend. It was when we had the thaw. Then we had a little bit of that slushy snow for like I think a Thursday, Friday, and then it got cold again. Well, what happened? Somebody was flying our, the Seminole that we have down at Flying Cloud for training. They were flying it, and they reported to me, we put the gear up. We thought the in-transit light was on, but then it went out, so we had full gear up. We went with the gear down, and we didn't get full indication on one side. So then we cycled the gear again and then brought it back down. And I said, so had that been flying? Was there a lot of slushy air or water and snow at different points? He said, yeah, the person before it did. And then kind of a front came through and it got really cold. So this is closer to an evening flight. And so obviously, I had them squawk the airplane. I put up on jacks and performed a lot of gear retractions and extensions, and everything was operating. All the light indications were fine. What had gone into, they had probably broken free some chunks of ice that might have gotten into one of the little micro switches and caused an issue. When I got to it, it wasn't a problem, but the pilot suspected that might be what it was. He said, I didn't really look over the gear before we took off. That, do you see a chunk of ice in one of the micro switches? It's not a bad idea if you know your micro switches. Go in there and you can kind of click them. You can see if they're being depressed, or just give them an operation on your pre-flight. That saves you a little bit of that pucker factor when you're out there going, is my gear down? And then you're cycling a few times and you're like, what's going on here? I'm a little nervous. Is my gear down? Is it up? What is it doing everything in what it's doing, or is it just indicating improperly? So that happens. I mean, we don't think about frozen, lapse rate. You come up with some moisture on that gear. I mean, you go through a puddle and then you go up to altitude and the lapse rate is freezing up there where you're at. These are things that can affect things, and they're anomalies that maybe if you saw that switch and you wiped it off, you'd be fine, and it wouldn't have even given you a false indication. In this case, they were getting a false indication. So that's kind of that winter pre-flight, just kind of thing. Things that are down on ground might not be frozen, but when I go up now and it's close to that freezing level and that lapse rate to go up, and then now those items do freeze. So that's pretty much all I had on the actual pre-flight. So from pre-flight, I want to go into preheat. This is the time here where it's like, I don't know what the temperature was this morning. We had our hangar heated somewhat, so we pulled the airplane out. We were fine. We didn't have to do any preheat. However, it did take a long time to get that oil temperature up into the green. We weren't that warm before we started. So I look at preheating in two ways. Everybody always thinks about engine only, and I also think about cabin areas too. Engine only, what are our options? We got an electric, pad, band type of heating element. You got the different manufacturers, Reef, Canis. It's an actual device. Probe stuck into certain different areas, or bands stuck around cylinders, pads on the sump, and we plug it in. So plug it in, warms up the engine oil, keeps the engine kind of warm, keeps the cylinders, above 40 at least. We got a blanket on it. We got plugs in there. The cowl plugs in. And the question is, when do I preheat it if I use one of those devices? Do I leave it on all the time? Thunderbird, we leave them on all the time. fly every day, several times a day. So it's basically, it's plugged in overnight or plugged back in. If there's been, if it's not a back-to-back flying, we have them on the ramp, we plug them back in. What if you fly once every 2 weeks? Is it a good idea to have it plugged in? My personal feeling is, I don't think I would do that. You're keeping your engine in that area and your oil above freezing, and any moisture that would be in there could deposit on your cylinder walls, could deposit onto your camshaft and some of the rotating parts as the oil washes off of that and runs off of that and dries out, and cause some rust. My feeling is extended lengths of time. Don't leave your electric preheat on there. Come by the night before, or there's fancy little switches. You can have it plugged into your wall of your hanger, and then you dial up on your phone and it turns it on. And it doesn't cost that much money to do that. Or why not just come out to the airport the night before, plug it in, or before you're going flying. Leave it on for 6 to 8 hours to really get it stabilized and warmed up. Secondary type of preheating is you don't have anything electric plugged in, but you utilize like a propane powered or kerosene powered heater. There's quite a few of those out there made for aviation purposes. I built mine just with a small gas, not a super high BTU propane heater. Buy some ducting. Usually what I like to do is you can go to like Menards or Home Depot, and for most planes, you have that exit duct behind your cowling underneath. You could have towel flaps too. On my Piper, it's like this one. You can show it here. We got this airspace right down below where I'm taking a drain hose to get the oil out for this 100-hour I'm doing. But right here, there's that nice space there. It's almost perfectly fits a lot of these right angle ducts and stuff that you have, registered ducts that you can just put up in there. You might have to do a little sheet metal bending, but they just fit right up in there. And then you got the 6-inch hose coming over, with that you can buy like a scat tube or skeet tube, and then you can put it right onto the front of the heater. The only caution on that, let me grab a range. The only caution I have on that is, when I do with mine, why the aviation ones are, they're all set up for you, and they usually have an adjustable valve to change the heat on there. Though the $60 propane heater that I had, it's 1 BTU. However, you can dial down the regulator on there and get the temperature that you want. So I just, it's usually just a screw on there and a nut, and you crack that nut loose and you dial the regulator back out and to relieve some of the flow of gas to it, and they still operate. You get to the point where then it won't operate, but you can dial the heat down drastically. And that's what you don't want to get super hot where that's a lot of heat on a standard garage type or propane heater that's warm enough. So you want to back that off a little bit. Or just go and spend the money and get the aviation one. I just thought they were really expensive, and they didn't really, I just didn't want to spend the money. I'm kind of cheap. So I like making things. So, and it worked well. It works well. And then the other thing is, what I like about going from underneath and coming up is hot air rises. So you go in, a lot of guys I see, they go in the towel. Well, they get everything hot here, but it doesn't really get down into the sump area. It's all staying up in their towel. And you'll notice something, and you'll notice it actually on some of the Thunderbird planes. I don't think on this one, but especially on some of the fiberglass ones, the Archers, where they got it too hot, and you see the paint blistered a little bit where you're going in the front cowl duct. That's a lot of heat. Yeah, you're right. It's hitting the cylinders, it's warming them up, but give yourself a little more time. dial down your gas-powered preheater, come up from the bottom and let everything just come up there. Put a blanket over it or your cowl plugs, or if you have one of the nice built cowling blankets. Other than that, just go to your a moving store and grab, one of those one of those blue and black check moving blankets. One like this. We use these a lot around here. We use them because, like, when we're working on an airplane, I like covering up the wings if there's anything we're working on so we don't scratch it. This we're getting ready I'm cleaning right now, but I mean, we're getting ready to set out an engine overhaul on there. It's really nice to put all these parts. But these work really well for a relatively cheap blanket for just a quick preheat. So that pretty much covers the engine portion of it. You gotta, it's 0 degrees out. You warmed up your engine. You go in there and you check your lights. You turn things on, and we're still running a lot of vacuum-driven and electric-driven gyroscopic instruments. I'll tell you what, they don't like cold. They're really delicate gyros, and you turn them on, especially the vacuum-driven ones. You have a little bit of problem because as you start your engine and create that vacuum and start driving that engine, sometimes what happens on them, you got your DG and your attitude indicator. I don't know if any of you have seen this. I see it quite often around here. They all of a sudden go kind of possessed. They'll start to circulate around. They spin like this. The card face is spinning, and they're not erecting properly. They're just spinning around like this. And as the vacuum on your engine's increasing, it's just getting worse. They never seem to stabilize. They won't. Usually the only way that restabilizes, what it is some friction in the gimbal bearings and how the gyro is spinning up. And the only way that doesn't necessarily mean that's bad. It just means it was cold, they're delicate, the bearings are delicate, and it just was having too much friction as it was starting up. The only way to get that so it stops spinning like this is to let it shut down, shut your engine off, and listen for it, the gyro to spin down. And sometimes it takes a long time. I mean, it could take up to 20 minutes listening for it to spin down. And finally you hear it to spin down, and you'll see it'll kind of settle itself back down and sit back in the normal position that we see in erect. Then go try another startup. The other aspect is getting yourself a little heater that warms up those instruments and the things in the panel for the cockpit. And some of they're again the engine preheat companies. I know Canis makes one. I think Reef is working on one, or they have one. And it's a small little ceramic heater. Theirs is neat because you can put a plug in that just plugs into the same plug-in that you have wherever your engine heater is. They bring a cord over there. Or you can just bypass that, have it in your baggage area or in your hangar somewhere, set it in an area, and just plug it in with an electrical cord. And it's a very small ceramic heater. You don't want to be aiming at anything that's going to be combustible. You don't put it up there. But usually, what a lot of people do is they push one of their seats back, sit in front of their seats, and project it towards the panel.
So hey, Paul, a friend of mine uses a hair dryer to do it. I mean, I don't do it, but
you could. But I mean, how long are you going to sit there and hair dry everything? I mean, you want to walk away from it. Now, to be honest with you, a hair dryer or a here, what we call these, you guys for like shrink wrap and stuff. Like one of these, even on, here's my, it's not a hair dryer, but it's what I use when I'm doing electrical work to do heat shrink. It's a 1400 watt. Hair dryers are 1400, 1500 watts. A lot of times they do have two settings, but I mean, now this one has the metal out here. A lot of the hair dryers are plastic all the way around, but you look at that element that you're heating up, an electric element, it's really hot in that area. And it is usually doing, I mean, I suppose you could put a big diffuser on there. Yes, that would work. How safe is it to walk away? Say you're gonna, are you gonna You know, that's why, I mean, I think of like the Canis heater, that could come on when your engine, it's a small block heater. It's, you know, if it tips over, if anything were to happen, it would shut off. You could go and pick up a small, one of those little small ceramic heaters from the hardware store. And if they, you know, if they fall over or do something, you know, bump them or something happens and they fell over, they'd shut off. You just don't want to come back and go, oh, I smell some flames and then some heat, you know. You just got to be careful. Just remember, it's a small confined area. You don't want to start burning things inside there. So whatever you do, just think it through, watch it, and be safe about it. And I always feel same with preheat and internal heat. Blasting a ton of super amount of heat for a shorter time is harder on everything around there than it is to do less heat over a little bit longer time. But you know, the problem is,
so you're thinking maybe a 100-watt ceramic heater. Is that what you're thinking? Maybe a small 100-watt ceramic heater to
a
leave
small one,
in
or one you can
cockpit?
turn down. Yeah. I mean, you know, to be honest with you, I haven't really paid attention to it. I've installed several of them. Not taking any business away from Tanis. Go buy Tanis. You know, just to go get their certified one. But sometimes you look at people that have done it, look in the aviation field, and just see what someone has done, and see what kind of wattage they're using.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, just kind of. I mean, if something's way out of your budget or whatever, you want kind of, hey, you know, I think I can get this heater to work, you know, for a cheaper price. Well, just kind of take a look at what other people have done and kind of use some of their resource energy on it. That's kind of what I always do when I'm looking at stuff, you know, and then come back and see what it works for you. It depends on the size of your cabin. I mean, and where to put it. I mean, I think in mine, if I was going to preheat the inside, I would just move one of the seats back and set it on the floor, kind of aiming towards the panel. And then whatever I use, maybe even if I bought a Tanis heater one, I'd be looking at what I'm aiming it towards and coming, you know, for the first time I use it and say, okay, how's that plastic feel? Are things getting too hot? Is it melting things down? Or is it just dissipating the heat? So just be smart on that, but there's a lot of options to do. But I think it's better preheating the inside than saying I'm not going to because it might take a little effort on my part. That's what I'm talking about. Winter operations, if we want to be flying in the winter, let's do a little planning. You know, unlike I did, empty fuel this morning and tires. So, you know, Pete and I got out there. We're gonna go flying. It's like, ugh. All right, well, we gotta go get some fuel. Oh, we gotta do the tire. We should have done that last night or last week, you know, but we did, you know. But just stuff like that, just kind of plan ahead, you know. And then also the other aspect of the planning ahead, plan ahead for your mission. And remember that your mission might be a little bit different because of the colder weather. A lot of things come through. There is one thing I always think about, back to kind of the pre-flight and the fuel thing. I don't know what your guys' policies are, you know, FAA legal, what is it? VFR day, 30-minute reserve. Thunderbird, I believe our policies, if you rent here, we want you to have an hour reserve. And set your personal minimums before you go on your mission. Set those and don't ever deviate them. So now, you know, this time of year, we have a lot of changing air masses. We got high pressures coming in over from pushing low pressures out. And you go out on a mission and you go, yeah, I got plenty. I mean, the winds aloft aren't bad. What happens when they change? I mean, the other day, they were pushing from the south towards the north at probably 45 knots up there at 3,000 feet. There was no way, if you hadn't planned and you were minimalizing your fuel and going north and coming back, unless you stopped. Now, you can always do that, stop in between, but think about it beforehand. Don't have it set in your mind, well, I'm just planning an out and back and coming back. I'm at Tabs, that should be plenty of time. Pete and I fly up the Brainerd Lakes area a lot. We over like in Breezy, 45-minute hour flight. But I'll tell you what, if we had a 45 knot headwind coming home, we'd be doing probably about 45 knot ground speed. And if we had only planned tabs up and back, and all that's plenty of fuel, maybe not. Maybe not at all. I mean, at least for my comfort level. And there again, that you have to set those parameters. Just because it's FAA legal doesn't necessarily mean it's prudent. I'll give you this. Here's this Warrior right here. So you tell me, same type of plane that I fly. You got 24 gallons usable in each tank. At the little step in there, there's a little tab. It's 17 gallons. Okay. My Warrior. I mean, you got the Warrior and the Archers. I plan pretty much all the time. I think of that 160 horsepower engine. I just go to the max on there, and I pretty much just say 9 gallons on it. Now that's going to be high. Right? If you lean it back and you're running at 2300 lower power settings, yeah. But just kind of plan a number. You can use the POH, but I always don't use the best situation on the POH. I use the worst case situation, and then look at how you operate it and check how you typically operate. How much did you burn? I mean, I know personally when we're going back and up with our leading and our power setting, we're probably burning about 7.5 gallons an hour is what Pete and I average. I don't cut that. I still pad that. So now, FAA legal, let's just call it 10 gallons an hour. I can have 5 gallons left, half hour reserve as I'm coming in and landing at Crystal. So you tell me, what does 2.5 gallons in each tank look like? And that's not much. Different than in the Cessna, that you can turn it on both, and depending on how they're draining down, you're gonna get every drop out of that. But I got to switch left and right on that Warrior there. I got to be going back and forth. And I'll tell you, what does that look like on gauges? I'm telling you right now, 2.5 gallons on the side of those gauges, they're going to be pretty darn close to zero. Quarter tank, a little bit of quarter tank, it's 5 gallons. Huh? I'm not comfortable with that. And then think about this. Say you got, okay, well, I drained it mostly down here. Now I'm running my 4 gallons in this side, right over here. It doesn't look like much in there. You're in the left tank. What are most of our patterns at Uncontrolled? Left-hand patterns. So right now, you got the dihedral sitting level like this. Our pickup is right about here, down just in front of the sump. Now the sump is low. The pickup is built in the bottom of the tank. That's why there's unusable of a 1.5 gallons in this tank. That sump is right there, or that screen and that intake to it is right there. So what happens when we do a left bank? Where do you think that dihedral, where do you think that fuel is? I can tell you, if we were to be able to GoPro or see it, it's going to be piled up over here. So, so that's other things to think about. Just because it's FAA legal, boy, I tell you, my minimums are a lot different. So make sure when we're pre-flighting and think things through, especially in the wintertime, because if you did have an incident, it's kind of stinky cold out there. And that's the other thing, bring a blanket or your towel blanket and maybe your boots in the back. Have your winter gear stuffed in the back, even though you're not going to wear it. You can't fly with all that stuff on. But at least keep it in the back, So that's kind of the pre-flight fuel, stuff like that. Well, I got to move on. I'm trying to bore you guys with all these things, but there are things to think about. And that's what I want these maintenance seminars to start spreading in your live. So we did preheating, pre-flight inspection. So I'll go to the last points, and that is I have it as battery maintenance first, but you know what? Since we're thinking about the engine and preheating and different things, I'm going to go over to when do we want to put our winterization plates on? Got to take a look at your POH and the manufacturer on what they have on there. You look at this one here, exceeds 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're kind of getting to that point where we're not exceeding it too much. So with the flight school planes, I'm just about ready to get to put these on. Pete and I were flying this morning. I want to see my oil, up to around 180 degrees. We didn't make it there on it, and I was just kind of saving gas. We were just having fun flying over Lake Minnetonka and Waconia. So I wasn't really, I was at 2250, 2300 RPM. So I'm not really pushing a lot of heat there. But I mean, I was well below the temperature we like to see to get that oil heated up and get the moistures, and colder temperatures on the oil tend to produce more contaminants in the oil, which are they're acids that build up that don't go out the vent tube on the breather tube. And if you ever notice that, on the especially on the winter times when you park your plane after it's been flying and maybe it's outside or something, and you see kind of the foamy, goofy looking moisture that comes out of the bottom of your where the vent tube, right below the vent tube. A lot of that stuff that comes out of that vent tube is impurities from the sulfurs, acids, different things like that. One of the reasons why I personally, and I know there's a few mechanics that probably agree with me on this. I'm not a strong promoter of the oil separators, because the oil separators are usually stuck to your vent tube on your engine, your breather tube, and a lot of times that position on the engine, that vent tube is there for venting the crankcase, number one, because otherwise you'd have oil blasting all over. Speaking of which, I'm going to bring one thing up about that vent tube right now, and that is, you're going flying, that warm moisture comes out of there, you get that sludge in the bottom, you're out on a ramp somewhere up in International Falls, you come back a few hours after having lunch with a friend, after COVID is over again, and you come back and you start your airplane up, and you get up there, take off pressure, and all of a sudden you start seeing oil on your windshield. Your vent tube froze, your crankcase isn't pressurized, and you're blowing oil out your engine oil seal. So on a pre-flight after that, go up there, take your finger, pencil, make sure that is clear on cold weather operations before you go flying, especially after all that warm, sludgy, oily residue and moisture gets dropping down there. You see it, it's frozen on the tarmac. You'll see a little pile of that kind of brownish, creamy brownish looking frozen stuff underneath there. So, anyways, back to that. I was talking about the oil separators too. That's one reason I don't like them, is that stuff is contamination, and it's coming out the breathers. You're putting that oil back into your engine. I always think that when something goes out a tailpipe, it should stay out a tailpipe, not come back in. And something to think about that, but that's just my thing on oil separators. Yes, it does help because people say, I have high oil consumption. Well, why are you blasting so much oil out your breather? Most number one case of blasting too much oil out is overfilling. Just because your crankcase says I can take 8 quarts, mine says 8 quarts, just like this one. It's on the other side. Pete, where do you think it stabilizes out? You fly ours and stuff. Where does it stabilize out for maybe 15 hours, 18 hours? 5.5, 5 3/4?
Probably.
Yeah, that's where my airplane likes to sit. Everything above that, it's going to start blasting out the tail or out the breather vent and get on the bottom.
If it's over 6, it's going to be
way over 6, 7, 8. This is you're just throwing it out. And yeah, oil separator, you'd be throwing it out, but it'd be coming back in. But find out what your airplane wants as far as oil. Just because it says you can put in 8, that's the max, doesn't mean it really likes to stabilize out there. You just do a chart, just see what your oil consumption is. And I'll tell you, we get pretty much close to 15 hours sitting right in that, finally it drops down to like low 5s, 4 7/8, and we're like, let's throw a quart in, because now it's time for a quart. So anyways, that enough on that. back to winterization plates. We want that oil temperature up to 180 to get those impurities out. Pipers, not too bad now when they give us 50 degrees, but unfortunately going over to these Cessnas, we're blocking out these Cessnas on the front of the cowl here. They just screw on here. Now, one good thing about it is they're easy to put on and off with a couple of screws, you know, a couple of screws here, a couple of screws there. Remove when outside air temperature exceeds 20. Oh boy, now what? You know, we're not even there yet. So, you know, it's really tough. It's harder to get the oil temperatures up on these airplanes and the Cessnas that require that. You know, some people I know, and we don't do around here at the flight school. We just run them a little bit cooler. We change the oil a lot. They're operating a lot. The other aspect is you could take a little piece of aluminum tape and just try blocking off a little bit of the oil cooler in your engine bay just to get that oil temperature up prior to putting these on. But once you put these on, take anything else that you put on, that little piece of that aluminum tape, blocking off that oil cooler to get the temperature up. Don't put these on and leave that on there because you're gonna have higher oil temperature. The main thing is magic number. You'll want it to be at least 180 degrees. You'll want it not way up in the 200s. 242 is usually red line. That's the point that oil boils. So you start scorching oil. So you don't want it up that high. If whatever you're doing, take your winterization plates off if you're climbing out. The other thing is, even when they're not on there, we're flying the warm weather, climbing up to, we just want to see if we get up to 7,000 feet in the Warrior last week. And I noticed the oil temperature is really creeping up. Well, lower the nose. Maybe you're not going to be able to get that climb out of there. Lower the nose. Instead of going at a VY, you would a V speed for a cruise climb. Get that nose down, or just lower it off a little bit, let it cool off, and then go back into your climb. Step your climb down. So, but that's something to think about. Have them with you. Have them in the back, especially if this one or this one. They're easy. Most of them are easy to put on. 4 screws for this one, 3 screws on that one, and on the Archers and other ones, they're easy to put on. Maybe it's time to make sure where they are at, have them in your baggage area, just in case you're up north somewhere and you have a front that comes through and you're coming back on Sunday, and now it's like, oof, I couldn't even get my engine temperature up to 100 degrees. That's not good for the engines. They do not operate well that way, especially at cruise power stations. All right, last thing I want to talk about is time to think about your batteries. If you're not flying a lot in the winter, pull your battery. Pull it, bring it into your basement, keep it warm. Put it on the charger every so often. If you don't want to do that, purchase a trickle charger. You can use the ones from the hardware store. If they ever screw up and destroy your battery, you're not going to get any warranty out of Gill or Concord. They say you got to be a approved one from them. You know, for that matter, you know, if you get a good trickle charger, you know, I don't know, you know, probably don't get the cheapest one out there. The other aspect of it is this is a sealed battery made by Concord. Notice the seal here. This one is also a sealed battery made by Gill. These are sealed. They just use the case that looks like the non-sealed ones. Can't take those out of there. So these are recumbent gas. Sealed batteries cannot add water to them. This is a typical regular lead acid battery. And as you see, there is, if you can see down in there, that's your electrolyte. Once you've serviced these for the first time and put your electrolyte in there, the acid electrolyte, you never again put in more electrolyte on there. I had customers and people saying, well, I need some more electrolyte, they're low. No, the electrolyte has the salts in it. That's what produces the battery power. You know, all the salts and precipitation, and then with the electricity, they go onto the different plates on there. Distilled water. You don't need more of the electrolytic salts. You need H2O, pure H2O. So use distilled water, top it off, and if you look in here, Pete, if you get in there, you'll usually see some type of collar in the bottom of those openings, And usually they want you to bring it up to the base of that collar. So in this case, these look like they're a little bit low, but you'd bring it, but they're still covering the plate, so they're working, but it would really want to have fluid level up to that collar, the bottom of the collar. So, and just remember, keep it charged. Make sure that the fluid levels are up in there. Okay, so now you just put distilled water in there. It's mixing with those salts. Put it on the charger. It's not going to have the specific gravity it needs, and it's going to be like water. Water freezes. Specific gravity acids, which I believe they're somewhere in the 1200 and something range when a battery's fully charged, won't freeze readily, except for really extreme temperatures. So if you look in there when you're checking your water and you see some ice forming in there, might have been a little too low. It might not snap back. That means your acid level, your battery was at a lower charge, and that water froze.
If stuff's freezing, you probably shouldn't be putting them plain.
Yeah. So, anyways, but that's one thing. That's why we don't want batteries to freeze. They freeze at a discharge state, and they naturally discharge. They discharge at can't remember what the rate is. You can look up online. Gill and Concord would have them just sitting there from full charge, not hooked up to anything like in a clock or any of your avionics. That there is a few things that run off your battery with the battery master off. So there is a little bit of a drain, small milliamperage drain. They have their own milliamperage drain, and they'll say in the chart there, the internal resistance in the battery starts draining down. So I think I covered everything. How are you doing on time, Pete?
It's 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. I don't want to keep you guys too long, but is there any questions?
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
Paul Wickstrom here. You talked a little bit about you talked a little bit about tire pressure.
Yes.
Can you maybe expand on that, pardon the pun, about temperature changes and what you guys use for criteria on when to change the tube?
You're right. Now this is okay. That's a good point. That's a very good point, because what's the criteria in your POH? Uno numero. Yeah, that's all they give you for your specific airplane. So yes, you're right. I did adopt a little bit of on our chart. I made a chart in there, and it's common sense. You gotta remember, don't ever fill up a tire and wheel with more air pressure than it would ever be meant to handle. That's not the case with the POHs. It's a ride comfortability factor in there. The 6x6 tires on the Warrior versus the Archer versus the Cessna are all the same. The rims are all the same. The tire pressures in the POH are higher because the gross weight of the airplane. It all is arranged in there. So in this case, what I adopted with the flight school is the Warrior technically has a tire pressure of 24 PSI. And what I stated in there is, I'm okay. I kind of gave a range of maybe 5 PSI. And I said, I don't want it way below 24 PSI. And it'll be good up to 30. Because it's not going to hurt the airplane. It makes the tire a little stiffer. So I kind of adopted a range in there. So, it's like, well, geez, it's not exactly it. No, and we're in the ballpark. The idea, what I want to stop is, Pete and I went and checked our nose tire. Our nose tire should have had 30 PSI in it. It had 13, 14 PSI. It was starting to look low at that low. So that means, and maybe 10 down, it might not look low. So you gotta, so that's what I kind of put in for the criteria. Yes, the POH is going to have an exact number, but in a flight training such as your place, Paul, yeah, you're just going to have to make kind of bracket it up a little bit, because everybody's tire gauge is a little different, and it's not going to hurt to be 2+, 2- somewhere there, but to be 5 or 10- or plus, that's not good. So I just kind of bracket it in, give yourself a little bit of leeway between the actual specific number. And, and that's what I did. So that'd be my advice to you. And like I said, it's been an incredible except for this last month and a half, all of a sudden we started having flat tires. And I'm going, are people checking tire pressures? Ooh, then starting to get lazy. And then I notice with myself and the rest of the mechanics, when we check them prior to this, comes in for an oil change, 50 hour, we're checking the tire pressures spot on. Lately, I've been noticing way off. And I'm like, that's interesting. That should have been checked like 2 hours ago when it just flew. I guess people aren't checking it. So, so it's getting people actually to do it. And once you start operating in that realm, you're going to have a lot less flat tires. I mean, it's incredible how much that, running low tire pressures is just way hard, and you can't see it. There's not that much weight on them, for what they're lifting, so you don't see them till they're really in low state, Like I said, mine started to look saggy on that little nose at 13 PSI. It's supposed to be up at 30. I mean, that's over half. So did that answer the question?
Mostly, and then you adopted a policy there of changing the tubes when they look low, because the theory is that they're already damaged.
Okay, yes. Here's very good. Thank you for reminding me of that. Okay, so now you've been checking your tire pressures. Now, it'll be a thought in my mind. Pete and I just checked the tire pressures, and we're down to 13. Is it because we were neglecting it? Maybe. Because they will keep on going down. It's just the nature of them. They call them leak guard tubes by the manufacturers, but they still don't. The air molecules escape out of them. I mean, it's just the nature of them. They still escape out. It's not, through the pores of the rubber, they escape. So just sitting there, it's just like internal resistance in the battery. It's going to happen. But how long in between? So if I come back out there later this week and I'm down to 18, I got a problem. I'm going to change that too. So what the policy that I adapted with these is, okay, we check the tire pressures and usually the students go in there, line guys come out and they do it. They go, you know what? I filled that tire up yesterday and today and put 10 pounds in it. I'm like, okay, thank you. Pull the tire. I changed it too. That just saved us from a flat tire out off field to Cambridge or wherever, or on the runway here. So yes, by more periodic checks, you kind of see what the tires are doing.
Paul?
So does that answer it?
Yes, thank you.
Paul?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Going back to warming the cabin, I've had great success over a long period of time just buying a small ceramic heater at Home Depot, and I put it on the floor of the airplane, let the heat radiate up underneath the panel, and it's got a tip over feature and a thermostat.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I bet you it was relatively inexpensive. Yeah. And the thing is, I always say, when trying something that's not, and even trying something that is proven aviation related, try your situation, because there'll be a disclaimer in there. I'm sure Tana says, don't be pointing it in the wrong direction. Just test things before you walk away. And that's my main thing. The worst thing is to assume that because it worked last time, it just get comfortable with it. It's like Pete I did something today when we were putting our airplane away. The rule is, Dad and Paul, Pete, you're running the hangar door, you stay by the hangar door. What did I do? I put the hangar door down and I walked away to go do something else. And Pete goes, Dad, you're not watching the hangar door. He kept me honest on it. And it's the same thing. There's times where hangar doors are dangerous. We lost somebody down at Flying Cloud not too long ago from a hangar door that went. But even at that, if they go wrong, wouldn't you want to be there to stop them from going wrong and making more damage to it? So there's certain things that you just want to pay attention to, and that's kind of the idea. Don't just throw a heater in there and go, wow, this looks like it'll work, and then you go home and you come back and you just melt the plastic down in there. So just be really careful when you're doing that. Test it out and be smart about it. But yeah, that sounds great. That's what I do. That's the type of things that I do. So that's perfect. I think I'm going to go get one because I need one. So any other questions or any more information like that? That's really good information to hear. So
Paul, how often do you recommend changing the fuel sumps on the wings and the tanks?
You know, we change them when they start dripping, you know, and being a nuisance. You know, I'll tell you what it is, and it's the fact that most fuel sumps, it's not yet, it's 9 times out of 10, it's not the O-ring. You know, so let's just say, say you change them say you say, I'm just going to change them in annual because they're fuel-proof O-rings, but eventually they still break down. They're always seeing fuel. Most fuel sump issues is either corrosion from, you know, moisture in the tank, that it's the sludge down in there. It's what you're draining out. And then number 2 is, if you had one with you, what I do sometimes personally on mine is I just take them out. I just have another one, or you put your finger over it, clean the one out, and put it back in. Usually the problem with a leaky sump is the fact that it's got a bunch of debris in that, and where the O-ring seats in there, it's just got crumbs in there. So, and it's not a bad idea. So, I mean, you can leave, you know, some people say, well, I just drain some gas through it and it rinse it out. Sometimes that works. The best way though is if you're really gonna clean out that drain, if you can't, some are sealed, you can't. So you throw them away and you change them. But like the ones, the CAA 1550s that go in the pipers, and those type of fuel drains, you can pull them out, clean off all the debris that gets settled in that area of the sump, and put them back in there. They work just fine. Don't ever blow air in there. You're gonna blow your tank up. Don't. I mean, some people say, "Oh, I've heard of people blowing shop air, opening up, taking the cap off, and still blowing shop air." No, don't do that. You know, you're going to damage something. That's not a good way of doing it. Yes, it probably will clean the stuff out of there and throw it back up. Hey, idea is, I don't want to throw that debris up into my fuel to come settle back down again. It's a sump for a reason. Pull it out there and clean the crap off and put it back in. So, but you just got to remember, you do it quick because you don't want a big bath of 100 low lead all over. You know, when I change sumps out, I have one with a little bit of that fuel lube on there because it makes the pipe threads go in and seal nicely. And then I take one out with my wrench and quickly go like this, put the next one in, and you have a very minimal splash of fuel all over. So, does that answer the question there?
It does, thanks.
Okay. Well, is there anything else, guys, or you want to enjoy the rest of the day? Go do some flying.
Thank you.
I'll be doing
All
some
right.
flying at 5. Are you gonna still be at Crystal then?
We might be, yeah. Well, come over to my hangar. I probably am over there. So.
All right.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, guys. Sorry that we got started late. Pete's going to work on his getting onto Zoom a little bit better, so I'm blaming him. I was prepping. I said, "Hey, Pete, how you doing?" I think I got it, and then it just kept on having troubles with it. So sorry for making you wait. So
Thanks for
anyway,
helping us
have
on
a
the
great
weekend,
rest
Paul.
of your day.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
Pete.
Paul.
Yep, you're welcome.